Mr. Carter, the manager said, his tone a mixture of shock and sudden respect. The flight attendant's head snapped up. "Wait, you're Mr. Carter," she whispered, her voice barely audible. It was clear now she had no idea who she had been speaking to. Maya and Mia's father gave her a slow nod. "Yes, and I happen to be one of your airline's largest investors." The words sent a ripple through the cabin. Gasps, whispers, stunned expressions. The flight attendant's face drained of color completely. The older flight attendant sighed, as if she had already guessed something like this was coming. The airline manager cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "I assure you, Mr. Carter, we will be handling this immediately." Their father turned to his daughters, gently placing a hand on each of their shoulders. "You two sit down and get comfortable," he said softly. Then he looked back at the flight attendant, his expression unreadable. "As for you, I hope you take this moment to reflect. Because next time, it might not just be an investor you're looking down on. It might be someone who needed kindness instead of judgment." The flight attendant could only nod, her lips pressed together tightly. The lesson had been learned, and as the first-class cabin settled back into their seats, the entire plane had witnessed a moment they would never forget. As the flight attendant stepped away in silence, the cabin slowly returned to normal, though the weight of what had happened still lingered in the air. Maya and Mia settled into their seats, their father giving them a reassuring nod before adjusting his watch. The businessman from earlier leaned over slightly. "That was handled with real class," he said, offering a small smile. Their father simply nodded, his focus still on his daughters. The flight took off smoothly, but the lesson remained. Some passengers cast thoughtful glances toward the twins, as if seeing them in a new light, not just as children in first class, but as individuals who had been unfairly judged. The woman in the elegant suit caught their father's eye and gave an approving nod. As Maya looked out the window at the clouds below, she squeezed Maya's hand. They knew this trip would be special, but they never expected it to teach them a lesson about strength, dignity, and the power of standing up, without ever needing to raise their voices. Before their father could respond, the first flight attendant quickly spoke up. "There was just some confusion with the seating, but everything's fine now," she said, forcing a smile. But her words didn't match the unease still lingering in the air. The older flight attendant wasn't convinced. She turned to the father, her professional mask slipping just slightly. "Sir, I sincerely apologize for any misunderstanding. I'll personally make sure you and your daughters are comfortable." Her voice was smooth, practiced, but there was something else in her eyes. She knew exactly what had happened, and so did everyone else. Maya and Mia exchanged a glance. They were used to their father handling things with grace, but even they could tell he wasn't ready to let this go. Just then, another unexpected voice chimed in from the back of first class. "Actually, I think we all deserve to hear an answer." A woman seated nearby, elegantly dressed and clearly influential, leaned forward. She had been quietly observing everything, but now her sharp gaze was locked onto the flight attendant. Why were these young girls questioned in the first place? Her voice was calm, but carried undeniable authority. More passengers nodded, murmuring in agreement. The situation had gone beyond just one family. It had become something bigger. The first flight attendant swallowed hard, realizing she was cornered. Beads of sweat formed along her hairline as she glanced toward the cockpit, as if hoping for an escape. But there was none. The entire first-class cabin was now watching, waiting, and there was nowhere left to hide. The cabin was silent, all eyes locked on the flight attendant as she struggled to find her words. Her face was pale now, her confidence from earlier completely gone. The older flight attendant, sensing the weight of the moment, stepped in. Sir, please allow me to formally apologize on behalf of our crew. This is not how we treat our passengers. Her voice was steady, but there was no mistaking the tension in her posture. Maya and Mia's father took a deep breath, his jaw tight. He looked down at his daughters, their wide eyes filled with questions they were too young to fully ask. He knew this wasn't just about them anymore. It was about something bigger. An apology is one thing, he said slowly, his voice measured. But understanding why this happened in the first place is another. His words hung in the air, challenging the flight attendant to face the truth. The woman in the elegant suit, the one who had spoken up from her seat, suddenly leaned forward again. Perhaps we should call for the airline supervisor before takeoff, she suggested, her voice firm. That single sentence made the flight attendant's breath hitch. The murmurs among the passengers grew louder, a wave of support rolling through first class. And then, just when the flight attendant looked ready to crumble, the final twist hit. A man in uniform appeared at the front of the cabin, the airline manager, who had just boarded after being alerted to the situation. But as he stepped closer, recognition flashed across his face. His eyes landed on the father, and his expression shifted instantly. The flight was supposed to be a special trip for twin sisters Maya and Mia, but what should have been a smooth first-class experience quickly turned uncomfortable. As they approached their seats, a stern-faced flight attendant blocked their way. "This section is for first-class passengers only," she said firmly, eyeing the girls with doubt. Confused, they explained that their father had booked the seats, but she wasn't convinced. The tension in the cabin grew as other passengers started to watch. The twins stood frozen, feeling small under the weight of the flight attendant's gaze. Just when it seemed like they might be forced to move, a deep authoritative voice cut through the awkward silence. Their father, who had been a few steps behind, finally stepped forward. And the moment he revealed who he was, everything changed. The flight attendant's expression shifted instantly, but by then the damage had already been done. The cabin grew eerily quiet as all eyes shifted to the man now standing beside the twins. Dressed in a sharp suit with an air of quiet confidence, he looked directly at the flight attendant. "Is there a problem with my daughter sitting here?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. The attendant hesitated, suddenly unsure. Her earlier confidence wavered as she glanced between the girls and their father. Maya clutched Maya's hand tightly, sensing the tension in the air. They had traveled before, but never had they felt this kind of doubt cast upon them. Passengers nearby whispered among themselves, some exchanging concerned looks. The flight attendant cleared her throat, her tone shifting. "I just needed to confirm their seats," she mumbled, though her earlier attitude told a different story. Their father, however, wasn't letting it slide that easily. He reached into his pocket, pulling out something that made the flight attendant's face go pale. The flight attendant's breath hitched as she stared at the object in the man's hand. A sleek black card with a distinctive emblem gleamed under the cabin lights. A few passengers gasped, recognizing it instantly. But it wasn't just the card. It was the name embossed on it that made the flight attendant's face drain of color. Maya and Mia exchanged a quick glance, still gripping each other's hands. They didn't fully understand what was happening, but they could feel the shift. Their father remained composed, watching the flight attendant carefully as she fumbled for words. I just didn't realize," she stammered. A businessman in the next row, who had been watching everything, leaned forward slightly. "Unbelievable," he muttered under his breath. Others murmured in agreement. The air inside the cabin felt heavier now, thick with unspoken thoughts. But their father wasn't done yet. He slipped the card back into his pocket and took a slow step forward. "Didn't realize what?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with meaning. The flight attendant swallowed hard. her gaze darting around as if searching for an escape. But there wasn't one. The truth was right in front of her, and now everyone was waiting for her answer. The flight attendant's fingers twitched as she shifted her weight, clearly